There we go. Okay, so I've got to get through this. I got 20 minutes to do it. So go ahead and give me some space. So I won't be asking too many questions here, because this one's the one we've got to use for the students at home or who missed today, or who just fell asleep or have been on their phone the whole hour, whatever it happens to be. But what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of draw some parallels from the Greeks to us, and we're going to kind of look back a little bit. Look, it's always been a battle between the Athenian democracy and the greatest autocracy ever created under Cyrus the Great. We know that on paper, the empire of Cyrus should have had no problems just rolling over Athens. I mean, it wasn't even a close contest. It'd be like kind of like the United States taking on Costa Rica. The truth of the matter is, though, this led to the Persian Wars. And the Persians, give them credit, they came again and again and again with increasing power each time. First fleet sunk, second fleet, of course, they crashed at the Battle of Marathon, right? So they came back 10 years later with a much bigger, 10 times bigger force, and took on the Spartans at Thermopylae with their Immortals, and that didn't go well, but they still won the battle. They won the battle, but we know what happens next is they burn Athens, so that's their number one goal. Number two is probably to occupy Greece, right? And that was egged on by the Athenians themselves, who had evacuated their city, who were complete refugees, who were totally lost to humanity. Who knows how many of them would have survived, how many would have been sold into slavery, how many of them would have had to flee for who knows where. But they cut a deal. We will help you destroy the rest of the Greek fleet in exchange for you letting us live. And he buys it, and it's a complete lie. Themistocles, you know, the person that got up on the rock there on the mountain and convinced the people to build 100 triremes instead of putting it in their own pockets. He had a strategy. Let the Persian fleet come in at full speed through this channel where they couldn't maneuver, choppy waters on this half, not so on this half, and then you hit him from the side. And he fell for it. It was brilliantly laid. And before you know it, Xerxes, who's sitting up on the hill watching his fleet get destroyed, decides he has one course of action. He's got to evacuate because he can't maintain the supply chain all the way from Persia to here without that navy. So he takes off. He does leave a small token force to occupy the areas they had taken, but the Spartans, totally ticked off, as you could imagine, take them on in a battle called Plataea, and the Persians are totally kicked out of Greece. Now, the Greeks don't know that they are now gone for good. The Persians aren't coming back. They had met their strategic goal. They had destroyed Athens. They had set the example for the Persian Empire. So when they get back to Persia, they sell it as a great victory. Okay? From one perspective, it was. But from the Greek perspective, it was like, oh, guess what? We just figured out how to beat them. And Athens creates the strongest fleet in the seas. They double down on the new technology. Pericles became their leader. He was from the aristocratic class. He ruled a little bit like an old-fashioned tyrant, even though the democracy was still there voting on stuff. But he rebuilt Athens to a splendor that they had never known before. Look, they had defeated, the Spartans didn't defeat them. The Athenians did at Marathon and at Salamis. That's what defeated the Persians. So these guys are feeling really good about themselves. And they organize an alliance called the Delian League. This is really important, so pay attention. 200 Greek city-states were sucked into a military maritime alliance against future Persian invasions. The fear of a new invasion caused these people to cough up lots of cash, put it at the island of Delos, which it was used by the Athenians to expand their trade, their foreign policy, oh yes, and their military control over the area. Basically, what we have is Pericles and the Athenians are falling into a trap called hubris. Now, we don't have time for you to look it up like we did in the other classes. I need you two to listen. Thank you. Now, here's the deal. Hubris is excessive pride or even arrogance. Now, look, do Americans have a lot of pride in their country?
Yes.
Are we a little arrogant about it?
Yes.
Have been in the past, right?
I was thinking,
I mean, every class said the same thing. Yeah, this is, so we are. Hubris is a natural tendency for those who've been really, really successful. Does the greatest Super Bowl team who wins maybe 2-3 Super Bowls in a row feel pretty good about themselves? So, all right, but you have to balance this against the elements of power. Now, I need you to come maybe take a picture of this because this is in the next study guide that drops on Friday. Now, I've simplified this because there's lots of different models you can use for the elements of power, but basically we're talking about three bubbles here, okay? Now, first of all, to be a great power, do you need a pretty strong military? Yeah, of course, right? How do we do in that department today?
We're one of the strongest.
Best in the world. Best in the world. Now, we can't take that power to Asia and win or whatever, but we can certainly defend ourselves, right? Well, that is the finest military ever created in the history of the planet. Trust me, it is. Okay, so we're going to check that box. Now, this also, though, includes local police force, border patrol, other things, TSA at the airports. It's your whole security apparatus. How are we doing with the rest of it? Did you guys see those border patrol agents the other day on horseback? Look, we have our mainline militaries in top shape, no question about it. But below that, we have issues, right? Some police forces are really good, and other police forces aren't as well trained as they need to be. And I think the Border Patrol is totally undermanned right now. They're certainly being overwhelmed, right? So you have to keep an eye on all of this. This has to work. Also, what has to work is your economic supply chain. You got to get goods and products to you. Now, Athens was, man, they had the best fleet and they became the masters of the Western Mediterranean, okay? Now that's the military side. On the economic side, they had never prospered more. Their port was never busier. The population swelled, they were trading more, interacting more with these other places, and they created the Athenian economic empire. You got to have food and supplies coming in, right? And we're facing that now in Long Beach. We got a bottleneck in the supply chain at Long Beach. We've got to figure out how to get more trucks there, and they're breaking down. One of the quick answers would be to hire truck companies from Mexico to help. Yeah. All right. Anyway, point is, this has got to work. Then what else has to work is your political philosophy has got to come together so a leader can lead you. Okay. So you need a political philosophy and leadership. Now, what is the American political philosophy? Look, we are so diverse. We're not the same in terms of religion, in terms of money, wealth, power. We're not in terms of gender. We're not the same in terms of how we were founded, the 11 nations, not in terms of race or anything else. We are one of the most diverse countries that ever existed in the history of the planet. What is the glue that binds us together philosophically and politically? Time for discussion. Take it. Now, see, that came up last hour too, and we could have a great discussion, but it's just a word. Freedom for you has a different definition than freedom for someone else, right? Let's take the mask thing. Some people, freedom is not wearing a mask. For others, it's freedom from the virus, so you wear a mask. Two very different versions of freedom. So you can't say freedom because we all don't agree on what freedom even means. But it was a good answer for a start.
But that disagreement is only caused by having freedom to disagree.
No, that's exactly right. That's the First Amendment. That's why I love the answer, because of this comment. Did y'all hear that? So what is the glue then binds us together? Take it. We'll just kind of sweep the room here. Go.
I'm not really sure, but I just kind of got reminded of something, like the Declaration of Independence, right? Like all sorts of human events.
I think you're really close to the mark there. Does the Declaration of Independence give us a certain philosophical unity? All people are equal. Now there's one more piece to the puzzle. No other class has pulled that one out, but it's true. What's the other one?
Is it the right to vote?
Comes from where though? Because see, there's some places where they want to limit the people to vote, and so the right to vote has come along slowly. Some people don't believe in that. They believe in the last election that it was stolen, and some people shouldn't be allowed to vote. They should restrict voting. We have 34 states that are limiting the vote right now as we talk.
What are the requirements?
Exactly. Keep going, because you're not quite there yet, but you got a good starting point.
I think something critical, I could be completely wrong about this, but something I think is critical to America and what defines America is, in an ironic twist, almost.
Get to the point. We're running out of time.
A lack of pride, like the.
Okay, now
institution-
listen, that's not it either.
No,
It's closer to what you just said. Where does that idea of voting come from?
Quality? Democracy.
The Constitution of the United States over time allowed us to create a system where people now feel like it's their right to vote. Originally, did they have that right to vote? No, but it's growing and it's still emerging. We're not there yet. We're not to the point where by the way, 16-year-olds, you should have a right to vote on your future, people, in local elections at least. But that's a whole discussion for another day. The only thing that unifies this country at all politically is the combination of the Declaration of Independence and guess what? The Constitution of the United States, which provides the rule of law. That's why when we get a leader, they have to be able to pass legislation under that Constitution in order to make things happen on our benefit and behalf. The only unifying thing we have is the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence. That's it. Nothing else unifies us. And from that, the right to vote is being battled right now in Congress. They're looking for a voter rights bill to allow more access to voting, whereas in some places they're saying less access to voting. And by the way, there's arguments on both sides. We need some sort of political philosophy and unity. We need a supply chain that works, and we need defense. Those are three elements of power. If you don't have all three, you're in real trouble. Athens created all three. They created the military superiority here with the Delian League. They also created the economic prosperity by manipulating that league in order for their own trade benefits. And guess what? The political unifying philosophy is that the Athenian democracy was the superior political system in the world. They really believed democracy and meritocracy that stretches from that was the reason they beat Persia. That a teeny tiny democracy can take on an autocracy and win, which they had done. Only one problem with that. The Spartans didn't agree. In a classic, what we call balance of power situation, whenever one power rises, what happens? Another power rises to oppose it. They had fought together against the Persians, but now all of a sudden this Delian League became a bit of a threat to the Spartans. So the Spartans said, we're going to form a league of our own. And they did. And suddenly now Greece was divided into two powerful camps. I'm not saying red for Republicans, blue for Democrats. That's not what this map is. It's very different. Don't draw that conclusion. But what you should draw the conclusion is that there's always going to be a counter reaction. So the Spartans now are all up in the face of the ultimately super powerful empire now of Athens. Athens had created an economic empire and a military one to back it up. So Greece had to choose. If you were a state in Greece, you had to choose. Try to remain independent. It was very hard. They went to war in a series of wars called the Peloponnesian Wars. Do not mix these up with the Persian Wars. Everybody always does. The Peloponnesus is a little strip of land that connects the mainland here where Athens is, and Sparta, which is down here. And this little narrow isthmus is called the Peloponnesus. While this looks like an island, it isn't. It's actually, a peninsula of sorts. This is the no man's land. This is the dividing zone. All right, what we have then is a classic battle between the lion and the shark. We have the best military force on land with the Spartans and the best navy with the Athenians, and they proved it against the Persians at Salamis. Dropping to American history, though, what we have is a situation after World War I and the Great Pandemic is America enclosed in on itself. Our economic prosperity, as you saw in the 1920s, was such that, you know what, the business of America is business, and forget about these foreign wars, everything going on in Europe. They're just going to suck us into another war. We don't want anything to do with that. We're going to become totally isolationist. And we're going to just make money and sell goods to other countries, and we're going to become a powerhouse by minding our own business. It was a period where we became what we call isolationist. Bad time to do that. Because then what happens next is this, is that, you know what? The experiment in democracy didn't work very well in Germany. Their economy struggled and didn't recover. They had a brief recovery under the Weimar Republic, which was their form of democracy that they were forced to do after the war ended. And with the economy constantly in the dumpster, and when the Great Depression hit, it hit Germany harder than anybody else, they turned to who for leadership? Hitler promised a return to great German glory, which meant they were going to be the #1 economy in Germany again, and he brought the economy back in record time. It's the economy, stupid. When he brought the economy back, the German people said, this is somebody we're going to follow, and they did, right off the abyss.
Wasn't there also a religious
Now listen
sector?
carefully here. What we've got is a leader who is a fanatic, right? Authoritarian autocrat who solved the problems of Germany quickly, built the largest tank divisions the world had ever seen, rebuilt the great German army, and built the largest air force that the planet had ever known. The thing that he hated most were Jewish people, but next to that were communists. So most people sat back and thought, you know what, Stalin and the communists here, Russia, these people are, they're so antithetical to each other. You read Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, and it's all about taking the whole eastern part of Russia, western part rather. So anyway, here's the deal. Everybody just assumes we can all sit back, the democracies can sit back and watch these two authoritarian governments beat each other into a pulp. One on the far left, one on the far right, let them have at it. Except that Stalin, as one student said last hour, was stalling for time. It's this very appropriate phrase. I loved it. Because when Poland, which sat here between them, became the issue, they decided to form a peace treaty, a pact of love and working together. We're going to be partners, and we're going to split Poland in half between the two of us. Both sides were just buying time. And when Poland was invaded, World War II started in 1939. And suddenly, the war between the Soviet Union and Germany looked like it wasn't going to happen. So now we have the British Empire and the British Empire alone facing off against the Nazis, who were planning a cross-channel invasion of England as we speak. In order to get there, he needed help. We're talking about Churchill. Goes to Roosevelt. Roosevelt did some crazy things that people really criticized at the time, but he basically gave them 100 extra destroyers just to protect the sea lanes, to protect the supply chain from America to Britain, to keep Britain alive. Lend-Lease. And this whole thing, right, was you know, at a time when Americans did not want to get involved. Then the British sent their army over to France, just like in World War I. And the French, who had fought so courageously in World War I, collapsed because they were outmaneuvered by those panzer divisions and the aerial assault, and they just collapsed in a couple of weeks. Suddenly, the entire British army found itself surrounded by panzer divisions and the biggest air force ever created. On near a little town called Dunkirk, here they are along the beach, planes coming all the time, strafing them. As they tried to load their ships to escape, they were either submarined or hit by air, and then nobody could escape. The entire British army is trapped on the beach. Churchill then comes up with a novel plan to solve this catastrophe. He basically asks everybody that has a boat in England, no matter how big it is, how small it is, if you can cross the channel, go and try to save as many soldiers as you can. People took their private yachts, fishermen, anybody that had a boat of any size. And this flotilla crossed over again and again and again. Churchill thought if he could save 100,000 men, he'd be lucky. He saved 250, almost 300,000. Really? That's fascinating. Well, listen, look at this now. It could have been total disaster, but you know what this is in history? What's the parallel? This is the Battle of Thermopylae in modern times. These are a few holding the Germans back long enough for getting everybody else out, and those little boats coming and rescuing this army to live to fight another day, just like the Spartans did at Thermopylae. They let the rest of the Greeks go to fight another day. And then the largest air force ever created starts to bomb England, soften it up for an amphibious landing. Hitler even planned where he was going to have his first dinner when he crossed over there. They had the menu all ready to go. Except that the British had been preparing. They had built a plane, they only had 1,000 of them, called the Spitfire. There's also another one called the Hurricane that had this Rolls-Royce engine that was extremely maneuverable. And it was, by the way, a better flying machine than what the Germans had built, although the Germans had many, many more. The problem with the Spitfire was there were only 500 pilots to fly them. So that's all that were trained. So over a 2-week period, the Germans threw everything they had in the aerial assault. They had to get air cover over the channel so that their cross-channel amphibious landing could happen. And these pilots took them on one after another, hardly sleeping. Many were shot down. As soon as they parachuted to safety, if they could, and then they got picked up, sometimes at sea, and taken to the nearest airfield. They get up in another one, they go after them again and again. But they also had one secret the Germans didn't really know they had, and it was called radar. They were able to pinpoint the attacks. And after about 2 weeks and massive losses on the German side in terms of the Air Force, Hitler called off the attack, because he needed those planes to go after his real target. And who was that? The Soviet Union.
So, Mr. Barksdale,